Good morning, Anoush Ehteshami. You are here for the public conference of the MEDReset meeting in Rome, and you did an intervention on the new geopolitics seen from Iran. What exactly has changed in the region after the Arab Spring from an Iranian perspective?
Good morning to you too. I'm really delighted to be here. And as you know, the first panel was looking at the different aspects of changing geopolitics of the Mediterranean. And one of the key actors is, of course, Iran, even though it's not a Mediterranean country, because of its influence along the Levant area. And my discussion was about how the role of Iran has changed since the Arab Spring, and in particular, how the Arab Spring is actually a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it has strengthened Iran's role because the Arab parties like Egypt and so on have weakened in the Mediterranean. But on the other hand, the sword also cuts Iran because a country like Syria, which was Iran's close ally, is now in disarray. Bashar al-Assad is not a credible leader anymore, and Iran is now having to put resources, financial, military, personnel and political in keeping Bashar al-Assad in power. And that is a huge cost for Iran that Iran was not expecting when the Arab Spring started. So my interest is in this two-edged sword, that on the one hand it has geopolitical advantages for Iran, but on the other hand, when it hits Iran's influence in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, then clearly Iran is vulnerable to the changes that Arab Spring has brought about.
What kind of dialogue should the European Union start with Iran on that basis?
I think that is a really interesting question, because in many ways, given that EU3 were instrumental in securing the nuclear agreement with Iran that was enforced in January of 2016, gives European Union an advantage in dialogue with Iran. And given that both parties, Iran and European Union, are very keen to develop cultural, economic, but also, I think from Iran's perspective, political relations with each other, EU is in a unique place to take advantage of this. But as you know, EU is not one entity. EU is a complex organization in itself. And I would say in that regard, there are several countries in the European Union that can actually accelerate this process of dialogue even further. Go no further in that context than looking at the current visit of the Italian Prime Minister to Iran at the head of a delegation of 250 business and political leaders from Italy. This is, if you like, track one and track two. Politicians as well as civil society and businesses sitting round table with each other, following up from President Rouhani's visit to Italy a couple of months ago. And around these kind of discussions, you can develop a language of compromise. If you don't reach compromise, at least you're opening a level of understanding. And if the Prime Minister is able to mention Syria once in his conversations with his counterpart, that is progress, because before the nuclear deal, we couldn't talk to Iran about any of these issues. So the more EU is able to integrate Iran in its own orbit, the easier it is for EU to discuss these issues with Iran, but also eventually to begin to influence Iran's policies. And that is what we all want. We want to have a Mediterranean which is settled, which is secure, and my interest is how the non-Mediterranean powers like Iran are influencing this direction of travel. EU cannot do it by itself. EU needs these other countries like Iran in its discussions to ensure that the Mediterranean can be stable, because frankly Syria is closer to Iran than it is to the European Union.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.